And we're live in the groups. Michael, how are you, man?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes. How are you doing?
Good. Sorry, a couple minutes late, everyone. And hello. If you're watching this live, hello. And would love to hear from you as we do our Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon for you in London podcast recording. And you ready to do a podcast today, sir? In beautiful London?
Yeah, it's beautiful, but not exactly sunny. Yes, I am. I'm indoors away from the weather, and that's probably the best place to be right now. I mean, it would be nice to be allowed to leave the house a bit more, but it's not that
That's
inviting
not
out there.
allowed. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, here in the U.S., it is, of course, Super Bowl Sunday, so that's going to be a blast.
What does that mean? Is that what is
Huh?
the Super? I've heard of the Super Bowl, but I don't really know what it is. Is that American football
Come on, man.
or
You're
is that
joking me,
baseball?
right?
Together. I'm like the worst sports fan in the world anyway, so I have
Well,
zero interest in
there's
it. But
this
I mean,
game called American Rules Football.
it is football, right? Okay, I thought so. I just thought it might be baseball, but I just don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is. And of course, Tom Brady's the best of all time. He's a player
Yeah.
and
Then he might be.
quarterback, which is a role.
Yeah. I've heard of quarterbacks. They throw the ball a really long way, and then everyone else just kind of beats them up a lot or something. That seems to be how it works. I've watched it. It's an extraordinarily bad
Oh,
looking
man.
game.
Come on. Help me out. You Americans, give me a comment in the comments here. Who do you think's
Come
going
on,
to win the Super
educate
Bowl?
me.
Is
Yeah.
it gonna be Tom Brady or is it gonna be Patrick Mahomes for the Super Bowl? Give us your prediction in the chats, and of course, tell us where you're watching from. And we got a great episode today. We're gonna dive into e-commerce first principles, which is a topic that I think I've never heard discussed before ever. And so I think this is a little bit of a brainchild, mind meld of a few different ideas that I've put together that Michael is offered to dive in with me on, and I think we're going to co-create this together in an interesting way. So, yeah, this is going to be a great episode. We'll kick it off in just a minute, as is our practice. We're doing this live into Facebook, various groups, and then we will record it for posterity for the podcast, and that will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcast and all the other platforms, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Google as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I really love this stuff. I could nerd out about it forever, but what I think is really exciting is this: that one first principle, very, very firmly grasped and consistently acted upon, has the power to change your business in a way that is sustainable over decades. I mean, if you grasp some tactic and you really get good at implementing it, that could change your business for sure, and there's great value in that. But the likelihood is, if it's that sexy, everyone else is going to copy it, and then it will no longer have to give you the edge.
Yep.
Whereas I think, weirdly enough, first principles are hiding in plain sight. Anyone who picks up a good book, anyone who's done an MBA, anyone who actually, reads a bit of Wikipedia articles, if you really want to nerd out like I do, has the chance to implement this. But strangely enough, most people don't seem to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a competitive edge that's hiding in plain sight. Really cool.
I would totally agree. And so the value proposition that we're putting in front of you all who are watching live with us is, in this conversation, we're going to go deep into some basic concepts and ideas for how to actually make more money and spend less money, either side of the equation, therefore boosting up your profit. And the principles involved that we're going to just kick off today and then start to drill into over time will be very, very pragmatic and practical things with real examples of how it really impacts e-commerce business. This will not be theoretical. We'll try our best to get it down to brass tacks, as they say, in real business examples, best we can every time. So I think this is a new area of discovery for us a little bit. And let's kick off the podcast, and then I'll kind of give a little bit of an overview of where we came from, where this idea came from, and how we kind of put it together for everybody. So does that sound all right? Okay, so if you're watching live with us, give us a hello. Give us a little like or love, comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us who you think will win the Super Bowl today, if you're inclined towards such things as American rules football. And we'll go from there. So, Michael, with that said, are you ready to kick off this podcast?
I'm ready. Let's do this thing.
Okay, cool. Let's do it. Just setting up the deal here. Okay. Right. Okay, here we go. What are first principles, and are there any that relate to e-commerce sellers specifically? In this episode, we're going to explore the topic of first principles, how it relates directly to e-commerce sellers, and how they can apply it to their business to increase revenue or decrease expenses, and grow their business over time. So, Michael, are you ready to jump into this with me?
I am. I love this question every week. It's great. Are you willing? I am. I
Are
am more
you a
than willing.
willing
I love this
partner?
stuff. I absolutely love this stuff. Yeah. I think the really exciting thing about first principles is this: tactical stuff gets talked about all the time. There's something about the e-commerce world and internet marketing generally, where there's a sort of great dynamic where everyone shares tactical stuff and tools and the latest hacks all the time, obsessively. And yeah, that's worth having. But what I love about this is first principles are hidden in plain sight. They're available to anyone who can read a textbook or a
Mhm.
book generally, or look at a Wikipedia article. And yet the application of them well in e-commerce I see is pretty rare actually in the smaller businesses. And I think that what I see is that the businesses that scale quickly from 7 to 8 figures, I haven't worked with
Mhm.
many of those, but a couple of those, and I know some people who have, really are more aware of those and they value them greatly, which is a big hint that I think there's massive value in them as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, totally agree. And it might be helpful for the listeners to just understand sort of where this line of thinking came from. I and kind of how I pulled the string together. I heard Elon Musk talking about first principles thinking in terms of rocket engineering, and I like SpaceX, and I like to watch their rockets blow up, and their biggies that they're doing right now. They've blown up a couple of them now. If you haven't watched those videos on YouTube, it's highly watchable. You can watch the live stream, just forward to the end until it blows up. It's kind of the way I do it. But he would talk about this first principles of engineering thinking, and then I was like, well, what is he even talking about? What does that even mean? So then I kind of went down the YouTube rabbit hole and just listened to his speeches where he talks about first principles. And he's basically talking about breaking down concepts into the very fundamental ideas in any exercise. And of course, he applies these kinds of things to engineering, like how he's trying to design a warehouse that makes cars really quickly. And he calls it the machine that builds the machine, you know. And so when I started thinking about his application of first principles to rocket design and warehouses and stuff like, or facilities for manufacturing, I thought, well, that's really cool for him, but it doesn't apply to us in any way, shape, or form because we're in e-commerce. And I thought that for a week or two. It was like, oh, it was kind of interesting to hear him say those details. But then I had a client conversation, and someone was talking about spending money on Facebook, and this idea of law of diminishing returns came to my mind, which was a direct application to that person's business use of Facebook ads. And then the light bulb, hit me. And it was like, okay, wait. Law of diminishing returns. That's microeconomics. And then it just was like a duh moment for me. It was like, duh. What do you think applies to e-commerce? It's a set of microeconomics, a few other core disciplines that have really, really foundational or fundamental concepts. And so therefore, then I started to just doodle out, oh, okay, what are all the first principles for e-commerce sellers? And you and I have this long list. I don't even know how long it is now. We an Airtable full of these ideas. And so that's really the genesis of this just general idea of trying to apply first principles thinking to e-commerce. And I got a quote from Elon Musk, and then really a framework that we can talk about as well for what are we even talking about? How does this work? But that's sort of the first reflection on it. Michael, I don't know if you have any thoughts or perspective on that, how this applies. Building the
Yeah,
machine that builds the machine is
yeah.
such a fun quote, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I love that quote. It's a personal resonance for me because my grandfather was a mechanical engineer, and so is my uncle. So I guess it's probably in my genes to a degree. Talking a lot. My mum was a language teacher, and so was her mum. But there's something about mechanics that fascinates me. The mechanics of how a system works, and I guess that's why I love working on the sort of big picture stuff because I guess it's systems thinking, right? But my grandfather literally used to design machines that would make parts for aircraft. That was his job for years, and there's something fascinating about that because, of course, if you design a machine that builds a machine, and the machine that builds the machine is better built, then everything else flows much, much better, right? And I guess in terms of entrepreneurship, we could say the machine that builds the machine is actually a person. The entrepreneur builds the machine. So if we can re-engineer the entrepreneur's thinking in a way that's fundamentally correct, that ties in with the realities of life, then there's huge power in that.
Yeah, totally agree. And there's the nice quote from Elon Musk that kind of frames this topic. I think will get us into these three stages of first principles thinking that we're going to share here. But his quote is basically this: "It's there it is." Sorry. The quote is basically this: "It's important to view knowledge as a semantic tree. Be sure to understand the fundamental principles, the truth, and the big branches before you get to the leaves or the details of, or there's nothing for them to hang onto." And sorry, I botched the quote a little bit, but you get the idea. I'll just read it again cleanly. "It's important to view knowledge as a semantic tree. Be sure to understand the fundamental principles, the truth, and the big branches before you get to the leaves or the details, or there's nothing for them to hang onto." And I really like that quote a lot because it kind of frames things out pretty well. Because I think as e-commerce sellers, especially when we get into it or we're trying to pioneer new things in our business, a lot of times what can happen is we model other people's behavior to try to grow. We're all copycats at heart. I mean, copying is the most sincere form of flattery, or whatever the quote is. And I think a lot of us will do that. We'll be like, oh, how does this work? Who's doing it? And can I just copy what they're doing? And to some extent, that actually is technically, a first step. But the problem with it is we learn tactics sometimes without understanding the fundamental underlying ideas or details. And so I think that's sort of the idea here is don't just learn a tactic. Don't just learn, some little, twist or, idea for e-commerce. Actually learn the fundamental principles, the basics, that'll really, really help you grow a business over time. Yeah, I think that's sort of the gist of it. And our three basic layers of thinking for first principles we want to talk about. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would think you're right. I mean, basically, higher order primates, of which we are one as human beings, learn by copying what other people do, and that's fine. But we happen to have this ability to think analytically if we work really, really hard. By the way, that's layered on millions of years of evolution of not thinking very well. So, yeah, I think you're right. It's okay as a starting point to copy other people, but it's way better to understand first principles behind it. So, talking of which, how do we actually apply this? What does this mean in practical terms? How do we apply first principles thinking?
Yeah. So, there's a little framework that that applies here that I'll just share screen and basically walk through this. The framework for applying first principles thinking that I'm suggesting we apply here to our own businesses is that the first step is you identify and define your current assumptions about what you're doing. And that could be very broad or it could be very specific, but look for assumptions in your thinking. And then the second thing is break down the problem into its fundamental principles as broken down into the granular detail as possible. And we have a set of questions we'll show in a minute about how to do that. And then the third thing is to create new solutions that are different than what other people have done before, maybe completely original, or maybe just hunting for new solutions that are better than what you're currently doing or currently working with. And that's the framework. Very, very straightforward in first blush, but the devil's in the details, as it were. And I think this first idea is really to probe into it. Is I think a lot of interesting work there to be done, which is what are our assumptions about whatever it is that we're working through, and are those correct or incorrect, and what do they lead to? Thoughts or reflections on that?
Yeah, I like it a lot. What I think you've immediately done is identify for me something that I hadn't thought of, which is identifying and defining your current assumptions. Because I thought, okay, so how do we apply first principles? We start with the fundamental principles, but actually that's probably not the starting point. What we've got to do is start with where we're at, and what we're at is, oh, well, I think this works like this. And you're quite right that actually, I suppose you could say that's based on the first principles of psychology, but one of the first principles of psychology is that we think we know stuff. and it's often not true. And so we need to recognize that. We need to have the humility to go, I think I know X, but is that really true? And then you've got to figure out how to identify your assumptions, some of which will be conscious, some of which will be unconscious. Even that's a process. And then, making sense of that, writing it down helps, I guess. And yeah, you're right. Actually, I think a lot of the value of dialogue as a tool for business owners, and one reason why a business coach is an incredibly useful thing, is that it's very hard to see your own assumptions. And I would just say that having outside help in some form probably is a very powerful for that reason alone, really.
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. That's why a mentor or a board of directors or a business coach, e-commerce coach, I mean, that's mostly what we do in our coaching practice, is ask people, why this, why that, what are they thinking about what they're doing here or there, or how are they reflecting on something? And sometimes it's interesting that somebody will present us with a set of facts and they will be really discouraged. Like it will have affected them emotionally. And Kyle and I see the facts and we're like, this is great. This is terrific. And they'll be like, no, this is horrible. And I'm like, no, this is great. And it's the same fact or same fact set, but we have a different point of view, and we have basic assumptions that we're bringing to the party. They have basic assumptions they're bringing to the party. And that's the power of having a small group mastermind or a coach or that kind of thing. And totally agree, because you really have blind spots. What's the old Rumsfeld quote? There are things you know, there are things you don't know, and there are things you don't know you don't know. And therein lies the big problem. And that's why people's businesses frequently crater. That's why people's businesses do not succeed. That's why people's businesses plateau and never de-plateau, never hit a new growth trajectory because of the assumptions that we use day to day. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, things you don't know, almost by definition, you can't solve that on your own. You need to get an outside eye. And I think that's when having multiple different views from the outside, I'm not saying a coach isn't good or an expert in a particular area is good, but having in the end, an accountant, a lawyer, a coach, peers in a mastermind is really important stuff. So, okay, so there's the broad ideas. So how does this actually relate to e-commerce then? What's the next step?
Well, I think as I started to reflect on the idea of tapping into the first principles, I mentioned already that the first idea was the law of diminishing returns that really piqued my interest. And we've talked about this already in a prior podcast. I think we drove into that a little bit. Law of diminishing returns and Laudria, law of diminishing returns for advertising. And that's just one tiny concept, but that's microeconomics. And so I think the first thing we should do is just ask ourselves, once we start to really drill into assumptions about our businesses, how do we look for bodies of knowledge that we can, apply? And I think the microeconomics body of knowledge is huge. It's vast amount of concepts that apply directly to many parts of the e-commerce seller's business. And the other big body of work that I think directly applies is behavioral psychology. There's so much work that's been done now by people like Dan Ariely and others, Freakonomics guys, and real deep insight into consumer behavior and what consumers will and won't do in certain situations. And that is a weird and wacky world. And so often what they learn is that there are counterintuitive outcomes or activities that consumers will engage in or take up as practices that you just wouldn't assume that's the way the world would work. And small little ideas will make a big difference. As they say, big doors swing on little hinges. And so I think behavioral psychology will play a big part in our application or our hunting for first principles for e-commerce sellers as we go through this. Those are two that come into my mind. Beyond microeconomics and behavioral psychology, though, I don't know. What are your thoughts in terms of what might be other bodies of work or areas that
what I'm like? I like to be what there's a German saying, why be simple when you can be complicated? And I have a bad habit of doing that. So you can rein me in. Between us, we'll get a perfect blend. So I think that there's a lot of first principles that can, and I think really speaking, do apply to e-commerce. So I've got a couple that I think are good, and then I'll ask you that you must have other ones as well in mind, I guess. The first one is systems thinking. I love your recommendation, Goldratt, The Goal, which is really, really fantastic book about systems and law of what is it, the sort of theory of constraints, which I think is really, really, really important right now in e-commerce, because the two constraints that show up is cash or cash flow and stock management, stock flow, and both things are really big challenges right now, and that's extremely everyday real stuff.
So the book that you referenced was The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, and it's an old book, and you got to get that. It's an allegory book. It's a story about a factory, and but the principles he pulls out are supply chain related, production related. Theory of constraints is the core concept that he pulls out. So yeah, that's a great book. Not to go deep into it, we've already talked about that a lot before, I think, but I totally agree. Theory of constraints is a huge one. Yeah.
So, but systems thinking in more broad seeking, I think what I'm realizing now is that if I want to really help e-commerce sellers to grow, I need to help them overcome the constraints of the system they're running, and working at any single part of it without thinking about the system as a whole isn't going to work. So let's put it simply, systems, massive. The second thing I think is more arguable, less kind of practical, but it's my personal obsession is geopolitics and the general business environment, macroeconomics, if you will, as well. Some people are really anti sort of macroeconomics, like Warren Buffett, who has to be massively respected. So I take that point. I do think it affects us directly in e-commerce in two ways. For example, China and US relationship, and Brexit. They're two practical things. The third thing is obviously the basics of technology. Moore's law, for example, means that processing power keeps increasing at a fairly predictable rate, and that has quite a few knock-on effects, some of which are really hard to predict. But I think we've got to account for that since we're in a technology-driven world in e-commerce. So those are the basics. What are your thoughts with other things that are still first principle?
Well, let me just make a comment on the one you just mentioned, which is the technology, Moore's law, and the e-commerce functionality. I mean, we were early into this, I guess you could say early into it. I mean, we started in 2007, 2008 when eBay was the way to do it. And technology back then for your own website and stuff was a slog. And I think many people, their frame of reference when it comes to e-commerce selling is that it's primarily a technology exercise, or that their constraint in their mind is the technology is too complicated. I don't understand it, therefore I can't do it. And that assumption is just so, I mean, I think a lot of us who are coaches or book writers, or we're trying to encourage people, podcasters, we're trying to encourage people to try e-commerce. And one of the things we have to constantly say to them, it's not that hard. It's not that hard to set up a Shopify. It's not that hard to, do any of this stuff. But there's tension there because you don't want to be a shiny object seller and be like, you can make $1 million so easy. But the technology has become easier and easier over time. Shopify has made things just frankly just incredible, amazing for sellers to sell on their own website. So I take your point completely on that. You're right. There is a lot of underlying technology components to e-commerce selling, obviously, and totally would agree with that. I'm just responding, as it happens at the moment, to someone who asked for the link to try to find the link to one of the books to the book we just referenced. So
yeah, we'll put the links, by the way, at theecommerceleader.com. We'll put the links to all the books we referenced today, which will be quite a few, I think, when we come into first principles. By the way, just to the point you just made, I mean, what you've identified is a kind of e-commerce platform law. Let's call it Miles's law, if nobody else has identified it, which is to say it gets easier and easier over time. So the technology side is less and less significant when you're starting a business anyway. It's more and more, I think, about actually being a good business person, whereas back in the day, it's probably more about being able to code in HTML,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So, okay, so the things that kind of pique my interest on this list, sort of my short list of things that I'm most interested in. The first one is really the nature of competition. I hate brutal competition. I don't like it. I'm a collaborator at heart, and I don't really care to wade into a bloodbath, a competitive bloodbath, and I just don't. I think about that. That one consumes my time and energy a lot. It's like, how can we not compete? And so, but that doesn't mean I don't want to play the game. It means I want to compete in a way that's outsmarting, or out positioning as best I can, so that I don't have brutal head-to-head competition. And that is the angle that I'm always camping on in my mind and trying to come up with. And so that nature of competition, though, that is microeconomics, like, all the way. And it plays out in so many interesting ways. The blue ocean strategy comes to my mind. Al Ries and Jack Trout's books, Marketing Warfare and Positioning, come to my mind. And so I think there's a lot of detail there that we can unpack together as foundational or first principles thinking as it relates to just competition. The other one that comes to my mind is, and I'll tell you the story about it. I've said this before in the podcast, I'm sure, but there was a critical lecture that I heard at Stanford on their YouTube channel, and it was by Reid Hoffman. And Reid Hoffman is the founder of LinkedIn, and he was the original PayPal Mafia guy, and he's gone on to be a big time investor. And he gave this lecture, and I think the lecture itself was from like 2006, or it's really old. It's like, really, you got to dig for it in the archives of Stanford, but it's a video-based thing, so you can watch it. And in one critical moment, I mean, he describes two ideas that stick out to me. Well, the whole lecture is just amazing, but he talks about this one idea that the fundamental competitive strategy in the business world that he was talking about was a financing strategy. It wasn't a product strategy. And when he said that, I stewed on that for so long. I just like, what is he talking about? Why is a financing strategy the fundamental competitive issue, not a product strategy? And so when he piqued my interest with that little quote, it just like was a splinter in my mind. I was like, what is he talking about? And then, of course, the more I've kind of grown in business and stuff, the more I've realized that in many, many marketplaces, in many places online for e-commerce sellers broadly, I mean, just across the internet, many, many things are a winner take all or winner take most scenario. That's just a nature of online selling. It seems as if the internet wants to make winner take most scenarios. And most of the algorithms do that. Most of the marketplaces do that. They will create an environment in which somebody has a landslide of success. And his quote to me was this idea of financial strategy. So there's a ton there. First principles related to financing is a huge area of interest to me. So those are two that stand out. I don't know what happened to my notes, but they're now completely different than a moment ago. But anyway, sorry. I have more, but I'm not sure where they went.
I'm sorry. I don't think I've made them disappear. This is a bit we'll be editing out of the podcast, I think. Sorry, I'm just taking notes of what you're saying, but obviously causing confusion by doing so. My bad.
No worries.
Your notes are just the same as they were,
but those are a couple ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are great. Couple ideas.
Back to the plot here. So my response on this, very interesting what you're saying about a financing strategy, not a product strategy. Also the winner take all thing. I think my understanding of microeconomics, I don't know which it is that most marketplaces tend towards monopoly, and this is pre-internet stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at how the real world works with, for example, car companies or banks that aren't primarily technology driven or not internet driven, that's still true. And I think that is a reality that's been accelerated by e-commerce rather than being unique to e-commerce. But I think you're absolutely right, either which way. And therefore, we have to be in a position to be the winner, because otherwise we're not going to get much worthwhile.
I think, to unpack what you just said, it's a first principle that the internet may apply to many, many, many sectors or concepts within business at just the velocity at which it was applied to, I mean, like in our case, the doll clothes pattern marketplace. Like, who would have known there was a winner take all scenario in which the doll clothes pattern makers of the world would find themselves? And yet, I would argue, I mean, that's kind of what's happened for us. And, so that's, I think that's what's happened as the internet fueled it. But the fundamental principle is, marketplaces broadly lean towards monopolistic outcomes where there is a winner that has a 10x order of magnitude better than the next guy, and then frequently duopoly where there's a two brand battle of the ages. Those are very, very common first principle concepts in marketplaces. So yeah, totally agree. Okay, so let's unpack this even one layer further, which is how do we exactly apply this to some project that we're working on in our business right now. And I have a little framework, 5-part framework that I've got here, and I'm just gonna put it somewhere and walk you through it. So here's the 5-part framework. If you want me to dive into it, sound all right? We good for this? Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. So the first question is, what am I working on right now? And get very specific. And throughout, and just do this, take these 5 points and then do that this week. When you're working on something, just pause, just put a fork in it for a minute and ask yourself these 5 questions. And the first one is, what am I working on right now? The second question is, what assumptions do I have about how it will help me? What are we doing right now? Well, we're doing a podcast at this very moment. What assumptions do we have about how it will help us? And just start to think, just even journal this out. In fact, this would be like a great journal. This would make a great low content Kindle or a paperback book for a journal product. Anyway, so the second question, what assumptions do I have about how it will help me? Third question is, why do I think it will be a business value? Why do I think that will be a business value to me? Is it, I mean, so that's the third question. The fourth question is, how much am I spending in time or money to make this outcome occur? Which is like ROI thinking. And then the fifth question is, which basic economic or psychological principles are involved? Or we could expand it to say systems thinking or, behavioral psychology, macroeconomics. So those are the 5. Let me go through them again. What am I working on right now? What assumptions do I have about how this will help me? Why do I think it will add business value? How much am I spending in time or money to get that outcome? And which basic economic or psychological principles are involved? That's your list. Take it as just put it on a note, a Post-it note, stick it on your computer. And anytime you're involved in an effort or activity, ponder these questions. Michael, what are your thoughts on this? Does it prompt some thinking?
Yeah, great questions. What am I working on? Assumptions about how it will help me. I guess it's a kind of double layer assumption. It's not just what assumptions do I have, but what assumptions do I have about how it will help me. I guess that kind of assumes that you think it will. So maybe even the question, is this actually helpful? It's a more primitive but useful question. And often if you find yourself bashing away at emails for an hour, it kind of relates back to the 4-hour work week question. Is like, is what I'm doing right now the most productive use of my time? Sometimes a more crude question like that can be quite useful. And if the answer is yes, you could say, okay, well, how? Your question then becomes extremely good. Why do I think it will add value? Yeah. And I think here's the thinking again, having an external set of people to be accountable to is really, really helpful. Because if you had an employee that's, if you're a small business owner using your money to do certain activity and you're not convinced about it, you would probably grill them pretty hard about their use of time or money. And if we don't have a coach or a set of, a board of advisors or a business partner or whatever, we don't have to justify our use of time or money. And I think that's a real danger. Like, is this adding business value is an excellent question. And I think the best way to have that is to have some form of investor-like discussion where somebody goes, Mike, why are you doing this? And if you can't come up with a good answer, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. So those are the things that strike me from the list particularly, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. Here's the list, just for the folks watching us live. Here's the list on screen again, so you can just jot it down. The first thing that stands out to me as we go through this list is I remember, again, back to Elon Musk saying at one point in an interview I watched, the best part, like he's talking about cars or rockets, the best part is no part at all. In other words, like, what is it that you're doing in your business that you can literally eliminate? And this gets back again to Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek concepts. But are there things that you're really grinding on that are taking tons of your time and energy or tons of your money that you literally could eliminate and it would not impact your business at all, other than be a positive outcome? Or maybe it would impact your business 5%, but you're spending so much money and so much time that you say to yourself, it's not worth it. When I really do the math, when I really look at how much I'm spending in time or money to get that outcome. And this is just, I think, a very, very foundational way to apply first principles thinking. And I hope everyone jots this down on a Post-it note, these 5 questions, and we'll put them again in the show notes. But this, I think, is key to starting to get at this underlying concept of how do we make our business so elegant, so machine-like, and so little labor participation on our side that we say to ourselves, I got a darn good machine I built here. And of course, that's the goal. That's the goal.
Love it. I know just 2 things that strike me in response. I mean, absolutely love Elon Musk quote. The best part is no part. I'm a big fan of using the bike, not as a sort of road racer. I'm not kind of sportsman, but just getting around. And Steve Jobs was apparently a big fan of bikes as well. And I think what there was one quote that really struck him was that pretty much all animals in the world move more efficiently than human beings. At least a lot of mammals do. But once you put a human being on a bike, then they have like 40% efficiency. In other words, 40% of the energy they use goes into forward motion, which is way more than a cheetah or an ape or a running horse or whatever. So, and what I love about bikes is incredibly simple mechanism for really multiplying effort. And my kind of take on a small business, but I think we could apply this to bigger ones as well. It's like, how totally stripped down can I make this thing?
Yeah.
And there's a Porsche quote. Porsche used this in their advertising years ago: for speed, add lightness. So it's almost about the value you add in the modern world, particularly, is what can you take out and the thing still doesn't fall apart? What can you take out and the thing still delivers on doing the job that the consumer needs and absolutely nothing extra?
But I love the play on the idea there where they say add lightness. Of course, that's the oxymoron. Because you subtract things to make it lighter, but their whole point is you don't subtract things by nature. You add things by nature. What we do by intention, we just pile on another podcast, another email, another this, another that, more products, more cowbell, as the old Saturday Night Live skit goes for their band. That's what we do, is we add on. And so Porsche's call to action is add lightness. That's genius.
It is a genius bit of copywriting, and I don't know the copywriting of that, so apologies to Porsche. But yeah, I think if we think of subtraction as an addition to value, in other words, adding lightness, adding space, adding elegance, as you use a great word for a business model, I really, really, really think that's important. And for product design, in a very pragmatic way, it's like, what can you take out of this product to add to the value for the consumer? And there's the words take and add seem to go in opposite directions, but I think by taking physical matter away, we sometimes add value because it's lighter, it's more elegant, it's whatever, and that applies to the business model level as well. So yeah, I think there's huge amounts about subtraction is really, really important.
Okay, so this is such a central point. If you're listening to this again by podcast directly, I'll just say the 5 again in case you never hit our website and you're not watching with us live. Here are the 5. What am I working on right now? Number 2, what assumptions do I have about how this will help me? Number 3, why do I think it will add business value? Number 4, how much am I spending in time or money to get that outcome? And number 5, which basic economic or psychological principles are involved in the work? So put those on a Post-it note, reflect on them often, and I think it'll add a tremendous amount of business intelligence to what you're doing. You'll level up your genius by a factor of 10 just by adding those questions. And I've mentioned it before. I've said it frequently enough that probably people are hearing me say it. But my biggest revelation in this regard was 2.5 years ago, where I think in 1 year we spent $78,000 on our Facebook ads primarily, and an ad agency to run it. And we just turned the whole thing off, and it didn't hurt our business at all. And the next year I had $78,000 that I didn't spend. And these are the ideas that, once you get into your business, you will start to think about, these core concepts. It really does add money to your bottom line very quickly if you can start to source out, what parts of this can I hack off for speed and for lightness,
Yeah, and advertising is a classic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you can often just completely ditch a load of advertising. I can't remember, it was you that told me that I think Uber spent $1 billion in adverts that didn't add anything to their bottom line, and they turned it off. I can't remember who told me, but that was last year. I think it was like 2019, 2020. It was very recent.
Well,
which is major.
I saw an article that was a list of companies that have done that. Their digital marketing budgets were like and I don't think it was Uber, but there was a whole a set of companies that digital budgets were in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And they flipped it off with a switch. Goodbye. Yeah. We're done. No more. And it did not change their outcomes in the near term. Now, it does it in the long term or whatever. I don't know. But nonetheless, I mean, that is very interesting. Okay, so let's wrap the show, and then let's stay on together for the live folks and answer some questions that have come in as well. So let me wrap it up by saying, if you've enjoyed this conversation, then be sure to check out our other episodes. We will be dropping more knowledge bombs related to first principles of e-commerce over the upcoming days, weeks, and months as we really dive into this topic. This was just the kickoff conversation about what first principles are, how they apply to e-commerce, and how we can begin to frame things as it relates to first principles for e-commerce sellers. And so if you'd have enjoyed it, then look for the other topics along this regard. And of course, we have a back catalog now of 2 seasons of episodes at the ecommerceleader.com. We would love your highest and best review on any listener device that you check our podcast out on. If it allows for stars or written quotes or whatever, it would be tremendously helpful. And we really, really thank you for listening to the show. That's my takeaway. Michael, any final concluding thoughts here?
Yeah, I think try and persuade yourself to be willing to take a little bit of abstraction, and then your job as the business owner is to go and apply this and make it practical again, because this stuff really is powerful. And the fact that it starts from the abstract shouldn't fool you about the fact that it ends up in very, very real bottom line impacting results.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so love it. That's a wrap on our podcast. Let's do some Q&A. So people are watching and they've jumped in with us a little bit. So someone asked, I'll just put it on the screen here for the live show. How can I optimize Amazon ads for my ebooks in a highly competitive self-development niche? It's a great question. I have 15 books on Amazon, and I am really, really obsessed with such things. The ACoS model, the average cost of sales for Kindle books or for paperback, either way, is really a fascinating deep dive conversation. I think we could do a whole episode on that, because the first observation is the Amazon product suite available for us for advertising is different than for physical product sellers in sort of the nature of how it works and how we can use it. And so I think there's some tricks of the trade there that can be unpacked. And I mean, the short answer is you can spend a lot more on Kindle books, ebooks, to acquire new readers, but the acquisition of a new reader isn't valuable to you if they don't subsequently consume more of your content. Like, so for example, a series of books is infinitely wiser than one standalone book on a topic, because if you acquire a customer through your Amazon advertising and they buy book number 1 in a series of 4, the presumption is a number of them will convert to book number 2 on their own, and then book number 3, book number 4, book number 5, and therefore your cost of acquisition, which is frequently called CAC, CAC, the cost to acquire a customer, goes down. So there's basic fundamental principles there for blowing up ebook marketing on Amazon. And I approach this topic in particular as a humble learner trying to apply these things myself. I am not a genius at this. I don't make a ton of money off my Kindle books. I love writing, and I spend a good amount on the AMS tools for books. But I'm a learner on it as well. So maybe it's a deep dive topic for a future podcast or conversation. But it's a great question.
Yeah, I like that question. I've got another question here from Zach, if I can get to show this here.
Yeah.
And I think we should both get into this, but let me just quickly answer. Does the e-commerce first principles also apply to product development itself, whether manufactured or handmade, or is it applied towards generating outside attention towards what you're doing? And I would say it's not either or, Zach, in my opinion, anyway, and be interested in your take, Jason. But I think it's all of the above and more. So I think product development first principles of, we're just about lightness. For speed, add lightness. I mean, for value, add lightness would apply to me to product creation for sure. And if I just show you my favorite thing that I just have hanging around is my wife and I keep buying more and more. This is just an iPhone stand, and it's a piece of bent metal that's bent 1, 2, 3, 4 places maybe. It's got a hole in it for lightness, and that's it. It's extreme. It does all the things I need it to do and nothing extra. I'm sure that's not expensive to make.
Yeah.
But it adds value, so I'm happy to pay the money for it. And so what they've done is they've added value to me as a consumer, and they've added value to themselves because it costs them less money to manufacture and ship and store and fulfill it. At each stage of the supply chain, it's cheaper for them. And that happens to be a manufactured product probably. But for a handmade good, same thing applies. But I think it also applies to advertising. We just talked about don't spend money on advertising that doesn't bring you a return. So that's my take. What do you think?
I thought, first of all, that you were going to hold up your coffee mug that says "Shut up." I thought that was your favorite thing.
I like that as well. Yeah.
Totally agree. And this is a great question. And I would say that there are absolutely fundamental principles related to the manufacture and the product design. And we have prior episodes on product strategy, but I would just say, as a top of mind topic, microeconomics is basically bifurcated into two big topics: supply and demand. And that is what it is, a study of supply and demand and alternatives and shifters of demand and total addressable markets, or all these ideas flow out of the basic concept related to supply and demand. And so when we're on the hunt for product, what we're really on the hunt for is something that will fulfill demand. Like, okay, there's a straight razor people use in the 1860s or whatever it is. And can the Gillette guys or whoever they were make a different type of razor? They're trying to come up with a way to fulfill that demand, and we're all doing that. I mean, we're all basically saying, what can we offer that will satisfy people? You guys are watching our live stream right now. We're trying to satiate your need for information about e-commerce. We're trying to supply you with the information. And so at a fundamental level, I think all of us are on the hunt for that. I'll just tell you one real world example on the product development side, if it's of interest. My wife and I have a good thing going in the digital world. And for many years, like literally from the first year we ever talked about our business publicly, the only comment we ever get when I go to present our digital goods business is, you guys should really sell on Amazon. People don't care what we do. They just think we should sell on Amazon. They just want us to do what they're doing. It's hilarious. So, for the better part of a decade now, we've basically said, no, thanks. You guys can sell on Amazon. We'll just do what we're doing because we're, happy with the digital products and all. But nonetheless, it's been like a splinter in our mind. Well, we've been exploring, and we did dabble actually in selling some stuff direct to consumer that was physical product. But my wife was just working on something. And she finished the project. She's a designer, so it was a design thing. And she said, this is too complicated for people to make at home. And it's unique and original. And it serves a marketplace that is huge. And the light bulbs are going off. We were like, maybe that's really an opportunity for us to finally make something. It's not simple. It's complicated. Too complicated for the home artisans to make. but they might still really, really, really want it. And therefore, is it a good opportunity for product development with a manufacturer and, like large scale physical product selling? So these were reflections in our own business just literally this last week as it relates to first principles for product manufacture. The challenge with what you held up, Michael, a simple device, is there's no defensibility there unless you have a utility patent.
Yeah.
Now you can be the first to market and just hope that you're a winner take all in a category and you just dominate the niche because you could install yourself. But there's a challenge there on the product side. So this is the tension, and these are fundamental questions to ask yourself. And every private label seller that goes through the evolution of unique product making has to grapple with these fundamental questions. So hopefully that answers the question a bit. It's a great question.
Yeah, which reminds me, with reference to what you were just saying, that Einstein said something like the simplest equation is the best one that solves the problem, but not simpler. In other words, you have to solve the problem of solving the consumer problem, make sure it's profitable. So it hasn't got much stuff in it, then it's more profitable. But of course, it's got to be defensible. And of course, then those things are tensions between which, somewhere in between all the different tensions, you end up with the actual solution. And the other thing to say is, as you just suggested, that it's an evolving process. So you may start, so Zach, coming back to your question again, the most elegant solution might be extremely simple to start with, and once you've got a product out there and proven product to market fit, then you've got to start innovating to stay ahead of the competition. So I guess if you're iPhone and it's Apple and you work for iPhone and it's 2007, the fact that it's got a touchscreen and does all the cool stuff is amazing, and then you innovate. So as you say, then you got the whole bunch of other stuff in there. But also, to your point, what you're considering with Cinnamon is interesting, that again you're responding to the first principles, which is like, there is value out there, but this is too complex for people to make, and that's a good reason to consider Amazon rather than everyone else is doing it, which is a very lame reason to consider it.
Totally. Helen just made a comment that I think is an interesting first principle idea, which is take out the middleman. That's, like, economists call that disintermediation. It's classic. I'm passionate about direct consumer sales through your own Shopify site. That's my jam. I mean, that's what we built from 2009 on. That, and focusing on Shopify. Once we found Shopify, we became the ultimate fanboy, fangirl for Shopify, and it's because you disintermediate. And let me just make one. This is just one little poke at this, which this is a whole podcast by itself, but just to tease out the thought there. You know why selling on Amazon is a bad idea compared to selling on Shopify? This one new one I'd never thought of before. Here's one for you. If you sell on Amazon, you get a customer sale, right? But a fundamental business principle that you're trying to install in your business is, what is the cost to acquire a customer? The CAC, cost to acquire a customer. And when you acquire a customer through your Shopify store, it might be more expensive than you acquire a customer on Amazon. But of course, you're not acquiring a customer on Amazon. But I don't mean in a technical sense like you own the customer. I just mean, are they bonded to you? Are they? Have they found you, if you will? And when somebody buys something through your Shopify site, they have found you. And if you can sell them a second thing because you've got their email address, or you can retarget them, et cetera, over time your economics change radically as your average value of that customer increases. Over time, they can be worth hundreds of dollars to you, thousands of dollars to you. But if you sell on Amazon, that customer might come back for the toilet paper or the next iPhone or the next, like, whatever it is to Amazon. But they will not necessarily look for you at all whatsoever. And that long-term customer value model is non-existent on it. I mean, if you're a private label seller, maybe you can make an argument for it or a defense for it. But just at a fundamental level, that long-term customer value model works on Shopify very cleanly, very easily. The mathematics can be applied, but on Amazon, it can't be. As easily. So first principles thinking there applies, I think,
Agree. And here's the other thing that I was I resisted the urge to complicate our podcast further because I'd like to do that. But here's the thing. You were talking about it very much from the owner operator sort of point of view, somebody who enjoys the cash flow and the profits, which is great. And I know you're one of the great successes of being that person. But a great number of people I know are developing businesses for sale and selling them, sometimes really quickly. Like a really super bright
Mhm.
guy that I'm working with, Ben. He built a business from nothing to selling it for 7 figures in 2.5 years, I think.
Yeah.
So it happened to be on Amazon. But here's the thing. The other way of expanding on what you just said is because an Amazon-based business is less defensible and the economics of it aren't as attractive in the longer
Mhm.
term, as
Mhm.
you just pointed out. The value of the asset as a multiple of the bottom line is way bigger as well. So you can sell an Amazon
Right.
business that is private label products, so some uniqueness, but just on Amazon, so harder to defend, suspension risk, etc., for 2.5 to 3 times EBITDA, and that does going up now. So
Mhm. Mhm.
profits, broadly speaking,
Yeah.
or seller discretionary earnings, whichever metric
Yeah.
you want to use. But for Shopify, you're going to get a much bigger multiple than that if you've got
Right.
primarily got your business based on that. And even if it's primarily Amazon, but with a substantial percentage, my understanding
Yeah.
from brokers is about 30% of your revenue via your own direct to consumer site, it really increases the multiple, as well as you
For
get
these
to earn all
reasons.
that money.
Yeah. For these reasons. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why people who are evaluating these things break it down to the component parts. What is the long-term value of a customer that you have in your Shopify system versus having sales velocity on Amazon? They're not equivalent.
Mhm.
And so there you go. Nathan Hirsch said, "Fire, fire, fire." I guess this topic is fire. So Nathan, honored to have you listening to the show, and thanks for the comment there. Yeah, I think this e-commerce first principles. I think this is going to be fire. So let's dig into it together. You guys show up for the sessions that we do live, and we're going to continue to pump out the podcasts on the topic. Good stuff. Yeah.
It
Anything
is.
else for the good of the order, Michael? Before we wrap up?
Not really, and there's so much to talk about. I mean, I guess we did have a list of our favorite topics that are coming up, which we left out of the podcast. I guess we could either
Mhm.
sort of record that to pop into the podcast, or we could just tease what's coming up for those who are watching right now.
Yeah. Why don't we? You mean the Airtable, the longer list?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
sure, sure,
so
sure.
you had
Yeah.
a list. No, I didn't mean all of those. We had a list in our notes for today
Mhm.
that you were going to sort of, you had 3 or
Mhm.
4 topics that you really liked, and
Yep. Yep.
I did as well. So we could tease those up.
Oh, I thought we did those, but okay.
No, we skipped that for some reason. If we
Oh,
skipped
okay.
it and you didn't intend to, then we could just
Oh,
record
no.
that and then
Yeah.
it's there to put into the podcast.
Okay, go. Yeah, sure.
Okay, here we go then. So, Jason, you and I have created a massive Airtable list of topics we want to deep dive into. It we're calling the First Principles list. So, what are 3 or 4 topics on that list you're excited to talk about in upcoming episodes? I love the blank look on your face.
I
It's
see.
we don't have page numbers on our
Yes, I'm with you. I'm
page.
with you right
You
here.
see it. Let me
Yes.
just do that all again. Let's get a clean take.
Okay, podcast
Okay,
take 3.
take 3. Woo, woo, woo. So, Jason, you and I have created an Airtable list of topics we want to deep dive on. Massive list, actually, and we're calling it the First Principles list. What are the 3 or 4 topics on that list that you are personally most excited to talk about in upcoming episodes?
Oh, sure. Yep. Love. There's just so much to unpack, but there's just a few, 3 or 4 that stand out in my mind. Just there they are. There. Don't do anything to them. Sorry, Michael. Sorry.
I haven't changed anything, dude. I didn't change that bit.
Can
I
we
didn't
start it
change
over?
the
But
notes.
let's
Shall I
start
ask that
over.
question again? Because it's going to be easier from the editing point of view.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Just
right.
don't type
Take
anything right
3.
there. Sorry.
Take 3. You can see them in front of you, right? I'm not touching that. My hands are off the screen.
Okay, go.
We good here. Okay,
Mhm.
so Jason, you and I, this is going to be one of those outtakes moments, like outtakes of the favorite TV shows. He says, let me try again. So you and I have created an Airtable list of topics we want to do a deep dive into. We're calling it the First Principles list. So what are 3 or 4 topics on that list that you're excited to talk about in the upcoming episodes?
Sure. Yeah, there's so much to dive into. I think for me personally, the things that really pique my interest, the first one would be understanding demand and total addressable market at the marketplace level. We have so many of our clients who are really exploring Walmart right now, and Etsy's on fire, and eBay is still a thing. It's hot again for some people. And so understanding the demand side at the marketplace level, very interesting to me. And the total addressable market component of that. The second thing I would say is there's a whole body of work in microeconomics called the shifters of demand. 5 things that will change the demand for a product. I think that's very fascinating. We need to do a whole podcast on that one. Third one I mentioned a little bit ago in the conversation was monopolistic situations where you can install yourself as a de facto monopoly, how that can occur with the help of marketplaces and their algorithms, and how you can engineer that yourself. I think that's a very, very top of mind topic for me. I don't like the red ocean straight competition with other people. And then I would say the fourth one that's very interesting to me that I want to learn more about is this idea of the financial engineering of your company and economies of scale. Like, you've heard that phrase so often, economies of scale, but how do we actually take the concept of economies of scale and apply it to our business and really make an impact for us applying those concepts? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm fascinated by just those ideas and many others. But I think that's sort of my short list. How about you? What's top of mind for you?
Yeah, those are, by the way, fantastic topics. Yeah, I really, really like that. For me, I'm a bit obsessed at the moment with the idea of asymmetric risk rewards. Because partly I work with Amazon sellers of physical goods, and there's massive risk involved in that. So anything we could do to de-risk it is really, really important, I think, and really fundamental to any physical product business, especially if you want to be on Amazon. Second one is profit maximization, which is one of your topics, and for the simple reason that when you own a business, you want to have as much profit as possible. It's basic, but it's really, really, really important. The third thing is one of my sort of favorite things that maybe it's an intellectual indulgence and it isn't practical, but I'd like to talk it through with you and see if that's true, which is geopolitics. And I think it does show up in a very direct way if you're importing or exporting. One obvious way is if you're importing from China to the US, which a lot of my colleagues do and clients, and I have done personally as well, and maybe will do again in future. And Brexit in the UK. I mean, it's really, really, really hitting UK-based Amazon sellers or US-based sellers who have stock in the UK and want to sell into Europe. So is it an indulgence or is it practical? Discuss. And the fourth one is a concept by Dan Ariely, which is when your intuition is wrong, and how to sort of check your own intuition with the right sort of mental models and frameworks.
Like decision-making errors. Yeah,
exactly.
Love that. Yeah, that one's great.
Yeah,
love that.
Really important, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is fantastic. Okay, that's the end of the podcast snippet that we'll add to the podcast.
Great. We'll add that in. Yeah.
All right, man. I think we're done. Fantastic conversation as always.
Yeah.
And thank you all for showing up. The conversation in terms of questions that were being asked, and I'll just answer one last that came up real quick, but I'll just say this, Michael, maybe we should do a live call-in podcast episode sometime where we ask people to join us on Zoom and add them to, or just read their questions, but do a whole Q&A session with
yeah, sure. I think that would be really cool. I'm very big on Q&A sessions. I think they are more sort of topical and sort of they're not going to have such a long life, but I think they are immediately answering questions that at least one person has, and the chances are 10 other people have them. So yeah, absolutely up for that.
What are the best upsells on ebooks is another question that came in. This will be our last one we'll answer. And it's a great question. My personal line of thinking lately is that the best upsell in an ebook is some other product that you have that is really the object of your primary business obsession. So for example, we have a client who has a primary product, and it was obvious for them to make a ebook that they could give away, and then in the ebook they upsell the product. And the thing that we created with them was just this list, and I think it was X number of secrets no one is telling you about in their industry, and very simple title, and that ebook is given away on their website, and it's just a straight when you add it to your cart, then you're upsold the product. And very, very simple device there. And that's not through Kindle. It's just through their own website, through Shopify. And then in the book itself, of course, you can have call to actions to buy any product. But I think those are the mechanisms by which upsells work really, really well. it has to be in the book in a Kindle context. You know, you want to, you know, basically sell someone about clicking through or, you know, looking at a product that you have to offer. But in the Shopify context, you literally can put the upsell right in the checkout process. Just, you know, ask them to add it to their cart. And that works really, really well. So if you're a physical product seller on your own Shopify site, consider some version of an ebook that you can use as an entry level device to engage people. Yeah. So there you have it. Well, as always, fantastic conversation, man. Really love it. Love this new topic the we're going to dive into. So let's wrap it up there. And thank you again, everyone, for listening. We're going to continue to try to do these on Sunday morning, my time, and West Coast, Sunday evening or afternoon in London. Michael, as always, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Been a pleasure as always.